Joined on the phone today by Afshin Shahidi, former personal photographer for Prince. He has a new book out called Prince, A Private View. Afshin, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you? Mankato. I love it. I haven't been there in a while.
Yeah, I don't know how many people you've spoke with from Minnesota, but have you spent a lot of time down here in Mankato?
I grew up in Minneapolis, so we would come to Mankato, and we had family friends that lived in Mankato. So yeah, we would come through fairly often.
Excellent. Well then, there's a lot of Prince authors out there, but of course you are a lot closer with him than most, and because you're from around here, you probably even have a second layer that a lot of people wouldn't understand.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think I know why he was so close to his Minnesota roots. I feel like I know why he, despite his fame and stardom and wealth, still decided to stay in Minnesota, where, as a lot of other artists, moved to the coast, moved to New York or Los Angeles. So he really loved Minnesota, and that was ultimately his home and where he would always go back to rest and recuperate.
Well, I know we're talking about your new book today, Prince, A Private View, a beautiful book, and let's tell the listeners a bit about the book, and they'll know what to expect when they go pick it up.
I spent close to a decade as Prince's photographer, documenting everything from his live shows to parties to shooting his album covers and other things. So I wanted people to get a glimpse of a side of Prince they may not have known. So in the book, you'll see portraits and you'll see some of the album covers, and then the things that you would expect to see of Prince, who to a lot of people seemed very mysterious and somewhat aloof. And what I try to show in the book is the more human side of Prince, the side of Prince that people haven't typically seen, the relaxed, guards down, very candid Prince. So that I think what you'll get out of it is insight into who he was, and I included some stories and some backstories about what was happening during the time some of those images were taken, or more specifically, how a particular image was taken or why.
Well, I know when it comes to a guy like Prince, you probably don't have like a typical day-to-day work schedule. I know he didn't keep normal hours like most people, but can you kind of describe, was it just basically Paisley Park one day, Morocco the next, just kind of out of nowhere?
It was. We had a very fluid relationship. I was not a staffer per se. I wasn't someone that showed up 9 to 5 to Paisley Park. We had a creative collaboration, and so often I would call Prince and say, "Hey, I have this idea for a photo. What do you think?" And he'd say, "Great, come on out." Or the majority of the time, I would get a call, typically, late in the evening, and it would be Prince on the other line saying, "Hey, can you fly to Panama tomorrow?" And it was both. It was somewhat difficult, but it was very exciting to be able to do it. And I was lucky that my family was supportive enough that I could get up on short notice and leave. But that's a lot of it just happened with inspiration. Not a lot of, there was never like 2 weeks in advance I knew that I'm going to be going to photograph Prince. It was always very spur of the moment.
Well, I know the casual fans usually focus more on his career during the 80s with, Purple Rain and all that, but really in the early to mid 90s there, he was really going through a lot of different phases and trying new things. A very prolific time, so I'm sure you were busy always.
I was as a filmmaker at the time, because I was working on his music videos, and like you said, he was going through a lot of artistic changes and business changes. It was the era that he had the word slave written across his face and was in the legal battle with Warner Brothers over the rights to his music. It's when he changed his name. And then again in 2000, there was another prolific time, and that's when I started photographing him. But he had his musicology tour in 2004, which was a top-grossing tour, and he put out some really wonderful albums then too. But I think everyone, like you said, does focus back on the 80s, and that's the time that I became aware of Prince and really got into his music and started looking at his back catalog.
Well, just reading through your book, it seems like a lot of times your photos almost like a guerrilla style in a way. You kind of had to shoot him when you could because he was always on the move. He didn't seem like he wanted to stand around and do second takes.
Yeah, if it was not a setup session where we knew we're taking portraits or doing something for a magazine, then it was more reportage. You know, I was capturing real and live moments versus a staged or setup shot. And so for those, I didn't have a lot of opportunities for a second chance per se. I had to make sure that the images were right the first time. Otherwise, that opportunity would be gone, and I would have to look for another.
Well, again, Afshin Shahidi with us and talking about his book, Prince, A Private View. And you mentioned he's kind of a mysterious guy, but you worked with him for longer than a lot of people. There's usually a lot of changeover. You were with him for 15 years, you said. Do you feel like he was able to let his guard down a bit, and you guys were able to develop a friendship outside of the working relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with him for close to 2 decades, 20 years. And in the time that I became his photographer, really is where our collaboration and friendship grew, and the mutual trust that we had, I think, helped him put his guard down, which then enabled me to get some of the images that I did get, because as much as possible, I was the fly on the wall, capturing moments that typically no one else would have been able to do. He wouldn't have allowed, someone photographing him, but he became so comfortable and so trusting that he let me. And then we would look through those images together. He would see the results of what I did, and anything that he didn't like, he knew that we could get rid of, or we would get rid of right away. And I think that also boosted his confidence.
Well, as you mentioned, around that time when the 3121 album came out, Prince was kind of doing his own thing and off the radar a bit for, casual fans, but, really back in the mainstream around that time. And it's amazing when you look at his career. He's almost had 5, 6, 7 different careers, and then plus all the side projects. I imagine you were taking care of all that stuff behind the scenes.
I was involved with a lot. I was photographing a lot of his protégés and the side albums that he was doing, and I was still a filmmaker, and I shot and directed portions of a feature film that we were making at the time too, and that's part of the reason why we traveled to so many different places that was in connection with that film. So I was able to be more than just a still photographer that came on, but I felt in a lot of ways that we were creative collaborators, and he looked to me for input and insight in a lot of those projects.
So I imagine a lot of the stuff you worked on maybe wound up getting put on hold or wound up in the vault. Was that discouraging at all, knowing the way that he was constantly working, that a lot of that stuff might just be back in the vault and maybe not see the light of day?
It wasn't discouraging for me. It was something that I actually learned early on, because when I was just a technician and a crew member on music videos, I worked on a number of videos that I never saw again, and they never saw the light of day. And I think at the time maybe some of them were too risque even for American TV, and that's why. And they ended up in the vault. So I had that mentality that a lot of this may not come out right now. Maybe it will later. But it was also cool to be there, to know that I'm witnessing something that no one else may ever see. So it was never discouraging for me. And then when I moved into photographing him, then none of those images were really held back. A lot of the images that I was taking of Prince initially were used for his online music club, which was his online presence, and it was a subscription-based music club for all his fans to come to get music, to see images, to kind of follow what Prince was doing. So that was all very exciting because it was immediate feedback. I would take pictures at a show, send them to his art director, Sam Jennings, and then, within the 20, 30 minutes, those images were up online for his diehard fans to see.
Excellent. Again, Afshin Shahidi with us, and his book, Prince, A Private View, is available now. You mentioned some of the stuff maybe a bit too risque for the time and wound up in the vault. I was going to ask you about his religious beliefs, I guess, changing over the years. Did that change the way that you had to work on things? Did you find yourself maybe stopping things you were doing in the past?
Not so much what I was doing, but it definitely affected what Prince was doing. If you know his music, he had very explicit lyrics at times, and the things that he discussed often were of an adult nature. And as he became more religious, that toned down, and he would even change his songs where he would, if there was profanity or a swear word, he would change it to something else. So it affected not the quality of the music, but he changed the content slightly to adjust for his new beliefs.
Well, I know you worked with him. You mentioned almost 20 years. It's probably difficult to choose, but can you pick maybe a favorite project you worked on with him, or something maybe you're most proud of?
Well, I'm really proud of the album covers, because I feel like those are directly connected to his music, and those will stand the test of time. So the 3121 album cover, the Planet Earth album cover, I'm really proud of those. And those were not shot with the intention of, hey, we're shooting this album cover right now. They were images that we made, along the way of collaborating together, and somehow he saw, that they stood out for him and to him, and they became album covers. So I really like that. But for me, the images all have a memory attached to them, and so they all hold a special place in my heart, because they remind me of what we were doing, or what we were talking about, or where we were when those images were taken.
Well, and when you're looking through the book, again, a beautiful book, and you kind of have to put it in the context of the times. It wasn't like it is now, where everyone has cameras and stuff in their pockets. I mean, this was a lot more difficult to capture this kind of stuff back then.
It was. I didn't really work with any crew, whereas typically another photographer would have had a big crew. I knew that also helped in Prince's comfort, not having a ton of people he didn't know in the room. But digital cameras weren't what they are now either, and so their abilities in terms of low light or autofocus, or even their resolution, was not up to par. But Prince liked the immediate feedback of digital cameras, and so I ended up switching over from shooting film to almost all digital, because we could shoot and review the images right away and get rid of anything we didn't like.
Well, after almost 20 years, what is it that ended your relationship working with him? Was it just time to move on for both of you, or what was the story behind that?
Well, there was no definitive end to the relationship. I think a few things happened. I have 3 children, but at the time I had 3 young children, and so I was trying to be home more. So I think that dictated part of the projects that I could take on. I was also am a cinematographer, and I had a number of other clients as well. But I think for Prince, when he shut down his music club, his online presence that he had that I mentioned, the need for the number of images also reduced. And so, Prince wasn't having me around to take pictures of him just because he liked pictures of himself. There was a purpose to it. And once that need diminished because the music club was no longer there, then the amount of time we worked together reduced. So over the years, he would call me for other projects, like, hey, Afshin, are you available to do this? And unfortunately, I wasn't. I think part of the nature of it being last minute for Prince was difficult, because I was already booked on commercial projects, that had booked and been produced for, over a number of weeks or months. And I couldn't just walk away from them without,
Sure.
causing a big rift. So it was no one thing. I think it was just gradually over time. That's how our working relationship evolved. But during that time, I still, I stayed in touch, and we saw each other, and he would invite me to parties, and he was a big fan of my daughter, who is an actress, and would reach out and just, with support and love for where her career was going.
Being so close with Prince, more than most people probably over the years, do you have an idea or maybe a sense of where he was going next, or maybe some of the projects he might have had in the works before he died?
Not a clear sense. I don't want to project what it was. I know that he was a prolific music maker, a creator, and so I know he would have albums, still gone on. He loved performing. I know he would have kept performing. Beyond that, I couldn't really tell you.
So now that Paisley Park is being opened up to the public, kind of turned into a museum, do you get a sense that that's what he would have wanted eventually? Is that something he would have been okay with?
You know what? I think it is something that he would have been all right with. I know when I was in Paisley with him, there was a number of projects he was working on, one of which was turning Paisley into a museum. So it was something that was already in the works while he was alive, and something that he was thinking about doing. So I don't think that's a really far stretch from who he was or what he wanted.
Well, again, the new book, Prince, A Private View, is out now. And as you mentioned, you've got a lot of stuff going on all the time. So what's next for you? Do you have anything else in the works or upcoming projects?
Yeah, I'm actually co-directing a documentary about Dr. Tommy Smith, who in 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City won a gold medal, and during the national anthem raised his fist in protest for what was happening, for social issues happening in the United States at the time. So it's a documentary about him, his life, his legacy. He's very much involved and alive and part of this project, but also I think it's very apropos to what's happening right now in this country in terms of social justice and the ability for people to express themselves and protest and what's happening with the NFL. So we're working on that documentary, and it should be done by next October, which will be the 50-year anniversary of the 1968 Olympics, where Dr. Tommy Smith made that gesture.
Excellent. Well, again, the new book, Prince, A Private View, is out now. Definitely a great book for Prince fans out there. It gives you a different perspective, a beautiful book. And again, Afshin, thank you so much for being on with me today. I had 100 more questions, but we're out of time. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And again, that was Afshin Shahidi, former photographer for Prince, and his new book, Prince, A Private View, is available now.